we will start, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wennubst. I'm the Vice Director General of the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation. And I will be, for this session, the moderator for the side event that has been co-organized by Switzerland and the GFDRR on how actually we combine two worlds that has been for too many years apart. A world that has been discussing about climate change effects and how we adapt to it, and a world that has been working on disaster risk management and response to disasters. And this is basically the focus of this today's conversation. We will have first our first presentation, some introductory remarks that will be done by Ambassador Franz Perrez, head of the International Affairs Division at the Federal Office for the Environment of Switzerland. And then we will enter into the more specific. We have a very distinguished panel. Here we have Mr. Francis Ghesquiere, head of Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. We have His Excellency Wali Noureddine Boutayeb, that is Secretary General of the Ministry of Interior of Morocco. Mr. Eric Nanchen, Director of Foundation for Sustainable Development of Mountain Regions in Switzerland. Ms. Esther Baur, Director Global Partnership Swiss Re. Mrs. Esline Garaebiti from Vanuatu Meteorology and Geohazard Department, Vanuatu, as well as His Excellency Mr. Diego Pacheco, Vice Minister for Development and Planning of Bolivia. Sorry for the disorders. I was following basically the order of the entry into the work of the panel. The idea would be actually, when we will come to the panelists, the idea is to get a glimpse of a passion that is related to combining these two parts of the same coin. And then we can have some discussions about some of the instruments that actually are in place. And the idea is to be as interactive as possible with the public. Okay, Franz, Ambassador Perrez, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pio, and welcome everybody to this side event. Let me first of all thank the organizers of this side event, the World Bank, the GFDRR, and also the Foundation for Sustainable Development in Mountain Regions, and most important, of course, our colleagues from Swiss Development Corporation who having organized this side event. Because it is addressing a topic that is really important for these negotiations, and not only for the negotiations, of course, but also for the negotiations. And I think it's one of these topics that create the link between the reality and the negotiations here, and what we're doing here as negotiators. And there are too many side events who are not doing that link so direct as this one is doing, because it is touching one of the most contentious issues, the most difficult issues also in negotiations, by providing also solutions and answers and a constructive way forward. So thank you very much for organizing that event on such an important topic. Why do we talk about disaster risk reduction today in the context of adaptation? That's the first question. Well, disasters often threaten human life, people's health, livelihood, and safety. They can impact heavily on the environment, put communities further at risk, and destroy development achievements. Due to ongoing population growth, unplanned urbanization, environmental degradation, and increasing poverty, the exposure to natural hazards, and herewith the vulnerability of society, are expected to increase in the future if not addressed properly. on the top of that, you have the effects of climate change, in particular through the increased frequencies and intensity of extreme weather events, for example. So climate change is adding to a problem that we create with the growing society, is adding it and making it even more extreme, more difficult to meet. At COP21 in Paris, countries have identified climate adaptation and disaster risk management as key components of actions to be implemented under adaptation. DRR is not only a topic for developing countries. I think that's something we have really to remind us again and again, especially for SIDS and mountainous countries, as presented from Vanuatu and Bhutan will showcase later this session. For them, it is a huge challenge, but it's also a challenge for developed countries. Therefore, arguing that adaptation or DRR would be something that is only in the interest of developing countries is fundamentally wrong. It is something that is the self-interest of each of the country. And the cooperation here is indeed also in the interest of each of these countries because we can learn from each other. We benefit from the experience gained all over the world in addressing that important challenge. Switzerland has long-term experience in managing a wide range of natural hazards. The Swiss strategy, Protection Against Natural Hazards, was originally not designed to address climate change impacts. However, the concept underlying the strategy proved to be most adequate to deal with an increase in extreme events and natural hazards due to climate change. In Switzerland, impacts of climate change are already evident. And let us also be aware, climate change, global climate change will translate into more than average in Switzerland. A global increase of temperature of 2 degrees will translate in an increase of 4 degrees more or less in Switzerland. So Switzerland is also one of the countries that is extremely vulnerable and that is more exposed than many others. Having said this, of course, the capacity of Switzerland to address this challenge is a different one. And I don't want to deny that, but we are also one of the countries which is extremely threatened by climate change. As indicated in Switzerland, the impacts of climate change are already evident. Melting glaciers and thawing permafrost, more intense and more frequent extreme weathers, even triggering floods, mudslide and landslide, more frequent and longer and drastic thaws. These are threats that are imminent for Switzerland. Therefore, Switzerland has developed an adaptation strategy which focuses on 9 sectoral sectors, including DRR, and on 8 cross-sectoral challenges, including increasing frequency and intensity of heat waves, floods, slope instabilities, and droughts. Key elements of the sectoral strategies is an ad hoc risk assessment to prioritize the most important fields of action of adaptation. For the priority fields of action, specific adaptation measures are then developed and implemented. Within the sectorial strategy of DRR, floods, torrential pressure in the Alpine regions, gravitational processes also in Alpine regions, and protection of forests are key areas. Switzerland implements an integrated risk management approach to deal with the increasing disaster risk, including carefully observations of the impacts of climate change in order to adapt the existing protection strategies in due time to be prepared for the future events. Let me give up some example of Switzerland. We change our philosophy from protection against natural hazards to accepting and living with natural hazards. And this becomes even more important if these natural hazards increase because of climate change. Including understanding that we cannot prevent everything, this requires intensive discussions with all relevant stakeholders to agree on specific protection goals. These participative processes are often quite intense, but they ensure in the end sustainable solutions and also real ownership. In order to make any decisions on what measures should be taken, it is crucial to know what the prevailing risks are in order to be able to make risk-based decisions. Therefore, you need up-to-date risk information. Since events and impacts will be more severe than today, we realize that planning measures, land use planning, urban planning are the important tool to ensure that not new risks will be created. Besides the planning, emergency preparedness is also the key element. So what are we recommending as Switzerland? What is a lesson learned from a Swiss experience? First, you have to know your risk. A society can only deal effectively with shocks and stresses if it has an in-depth overview of all prevailing risks and their complex interactions. The risks have to be evaluated, prioritized in each country at all administrative levels in order to decide which risks we need to focus on. Second, investors, be they public or private, investors must avoid building new disaster risks. I think that is quite important. And it is also indicating that it is not only public money that we need here. We can also create an enabling framework that makes sure that private investors build their facilities in a manner that they are prepared to new risks. So there's also huge potential, especially in the area of disaster risk reduction, for stimulating, mobilizing the right behavior of private actors. Third, reduce existing risks. Some risks can be avoided, planning, others reduced. Biological and technical measures are needed or managed by strengthened preparedness for better response and recovery. And fourth, create an enabling environment including a strong legal basis and clear roles and responsibilities of all relevant stakeholders at all levels that are followed by suitable capacities and budgets. DRR and climate change adaptation must go hand in hand. Together, it will be possible to increase safety and security. I don't want to be too long, therefore, let me just jump to one of the main conclusions that we are having, I think, and which is also relevant for the negotiations. DRR has to be part of adaptation. I think this is absolutely clear. And it is also important this DRR, really including climate change risk, has to be the same like DRR on already occurring areas. It does not make sense to build up a separate adaptation schemes, separate DRR schemes only for climate change. And sometimes in negotiations, you do have the impression that there's a call for building up specific independent silos of DRR only from climate change, and that is something that is not working. We need to integrate DRR into adaptation. We need to integrate adaptation in what we're doing here, on the ground, at the national policies, but also in the negotiations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franz. Energetic, as always, also putting us in front of the complexity of this world, seeing also from instruments. Now let's go to the panel, and then I would maybe start from coming back to something that looks maybe simple, but is not necessarily simple: visions. I remember when we met, Your Excellency Walid Boutayeb, we met 2 or 3 years ago in your office, and I still vividly recall this meeting because in 3 minutes you showed, or let's say you introduced a vision that you have and that Morocco has that includes also the topic of today. Would you like to maybe put in your intervention a bit of a glimpse of this vision? Et en plus, vous pouvez le faire en français, parce qu'ici, on passe tranquillement du français à l'anglais. S'il y a quelques problèmes, après, on peut toujours faire de traduction rapide. Mais on m'a dit qu'en général, we are quite well placed to understand both languages, as you prefer. So the floor is yours.
I'll try in English. Well,
thank you.
But perhaps from time to time, I'll ask for help. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Ambassador Pio, for inviting me to this side event. At the beginning, I wanted to talk about how we deal with DRR by pushing toward prevention instead of reacting to disaster. It's much better to enhance prevention, and we developed a plan to do that by having a fund and asking for proposals and co-financing projects for local governments, for administration, for enterprise to enhance prevention, to prevent disaster, to reduce loss of lives and the loss of goods. But you asked me to share a vision. It's a personal vision. Huh? It's not a government vision, but it's mine, and it fits, I think, very well with the title of this side event, combining adaptation and the disaster risk management in development. Climate change is already there in Morocco, and especially in Morocco, we know that for all the scenarios, Morocco will suffer from climate change. It's not like in France, we say Paris, perhaps it will be Bordeaux or Seville. Here we know that we'll have to deal with this very important matter. And the fact is that the result is scarcity of water resources. I'm General Secretary of Ministry of Interior, but if you put you up and you'll find a water resource designer. I worked during 20 years before in water resources management, and this scarcity, I think it's the matter. We cannot live without water, without sufficient water. And beside that, we have these extreme events, floods and droughts. You have not enough water every year. We have a very good policy in Morocco since 1970. It's the dam policy. We build a lot of dams, so we are not as vulnerable as the south of France. When we have a drought, we can manage. We can go through this drought if it's 1 or 2 years. If it's 3 years, it become more difficult. How to deal with this vital matter? Demand management is good, but it's not enough. So, in my opinion, my vision, I said, but perhaps I don't not say it as Master Luther King. I have a dream, but yes, I dream of them about the fact that Morocco, we have 3,500 kilometers of coast. So water is there, but we have to desalinate this water. And as soon as we saw that, we say that we have the problem of the cost of desalination and cost of energy. And there we have a second component. The second component, Morocco is pushing to he has an ambition plan of renewable energy. We plan in 2030 to produce up to 52% of our energy from renewable energy, solar and aeolian. Yes. And so my vision is to push as far as possible R&D to lower cost of energy, to have a green
belt.
Belt? Yes.
From the shore.
All along the shore, to save water from the reservoirs in the internal part of the country, and to use the third. In French, we have, I call it the 3E. And eau, water, energy, and engrais. What is engrais?
Fertilizer.
Fertilizer. We have very large areas of soil that just need water and fertilizer to give enough sufficient crop to our population. But without no water, and the dream is to go back to how we lived before, years and years ago, in oasis. Oasis is the ecosystem that we have sufficient water for the population that, and Morocco, in my dream, will not be a Sahara desert, but will be a lot of oases there and there with this availability of water, because we'll have this energy with lower costs, and we'll have this. If we began today, I hope that my sons and their sons will live in a country, even if there is climate change, we can continue to live. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I really asked him because for us, this is the entry point. It makes no sense to keep on just discussing about instruments that we can apply for reducing, for responding to disaster risks, and so on, if this is not part of a dream, of a vision. And this vision is very clear, because only leads also to social cohesion, because this is something that we need also very strongly. When you have a revitalized oasis, I would imagine that there will be also a social life that comes in with it, that strengthen also the resilience when you have migratory movements, for instance. And this is something that we've been working also, we now in centuries in Switzerland, the way we've been doing agriculture as being part of the dream of that goes to social cohesion. So thank you very much for accepting to divert a bit your presentation. Anyway, you mentioned the instrument, the fund that you set up. So it's important to, of course, consider that Morocco is taking innovative approaches. So also make sure that different actors are participating or can use also the funds that are available to make this dream come true. So I will move to the next speaker, if you allow me, Francis. I will ask you to go directly and be as much as focused as possible with your presentation, in order that we can still have some time for Q&A, for some discussion, I hope, after the presentations. You bear with me, I will be a little bit pushy in order to gain some time. The more I know that I'm unfair, I'm typically an unfair moderator. I deconstruct presentations always. People are not happy. And towards the end, I'm also getting pushy, and I'm completely unfair to come with the least one coming compared to the first. But now the floor is yours.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'll stand, because I don't want to put myself to sleep, and certainly not you. And indeed, Pio asked me to do some acrobatics. He saw my presentation before, and he asked me to completely reverse it and start from the end. So I actually think he's right. I think he has a very, very good point, and I'll try to make it very, very quick and to the point. So please fasten your seatbelt, and we can talk after if there's any question. But basically, what Pio wanted me to do is to come back to almost the history of disaster risk management and adaptation. If you think about disaster risk management in the development community 15, 20 years ago, people had this idea that disaster, in fact, they were not talking about disaster risk management, they were talking about disaster management. How do we go after a disaster and help a country rebuild? And then this concept of, but we can't really rebuild as it was before, because otherwise we're going to have more disasters. So we should include this concept of build back better, and we should try to avoid the processes that have led to that particular disaster. And over time, the thinking evolved, and I think the community, the disaster risk management community and the development community as a whole started to integrate additional aspects. Well, if we have disaster, we need to be able to respond financially. We need instruments. We need to think about reserve funds for a rainy day. We need to have contingent lines of credit. We need to have insurance, and Esther will talk after us. We need also to reduce existing risk. We need to retrofit infrastructure, make sure that all schools and hospitals are not going to collapse when there's a major storm or be flooded. And then we ended up where we were a couple of years ago, which is like really the sacred grail of disaster risk management, which is, let's try to avoid creating risk. Let's try to integrate in what we do in every development process. Let's try to integrate some concept of risk. Let's try to identify the risk in advance and make sure that the road we build first itself is resilient, doesn't get flooded, doesn't get blocked by landslides or by other elements. But more importantly, let's think about where the road is actually going, because that's where the population is going to move in the coming years. And if that road is in a floodplain or is blocking the natural flow of the river, well, that's exactly where we're going to have population exposed to flood. And throughout this process, I think little by little, concept of adaptation started to be integrated. And again, if you think about, I remember at the COP maybe 10 years ago, you had the kind of these were completely separate communities of people who were thinking about adaptation. We need to adapt to a future where the climate is going to be very different, and the disaster risk management community who kind of tried to integrate risk management, but without really thinking about the future climate. These were very separate communities. Over the years, more and more elements of adaptation and climate started to be integrated in everything that is being done. Now, this is a bit of a technical chart. My apologies, Payo. I know you hate technical and instrument, but I thought it was a good way to illustrate how the two actually now work together and have to work together. There's no sense of doing development without disaster risk management or integrating risk management. There's no sense of doing risk management without integrating the future climate. And if you think about the main tools of disaster risk management, everything starts with risk assessment. There's no point in assessing the risk based on the risk of today, right? There's no point, because we know that first the risk, the vulnerabilities are going to change, the environmental aspects of around cities are going to change, and we need to have dynamic risk assessment that take into account the evolution of the world, where populations are going to move, where cities are going to expand, but also the fact that we already experience increased climate variability. We already see a stronger and more frequent storm. When I started working on disaster risk management 15 years ago, the idea of a cyclone category 5 was a myth. It was a myth. It was just something that, yes, meteorologists had seen, but yeah, well, it may happen. In the last 3 years, how many have we had? We have had, 6, 7 of those storms. So something is happening, and clearly we need to take it into account. When we do risk reduction measure and think about how to adapt, there's this concept of maladaptation. We need to think about what the future is going to be, so that we don't actually, by putting population behind the levee, we don't actually increase their risk, because eventually that levee may break and that population will be flooded when it happens. And then most importantly, I think, and that's as really started to come into the practice in more recent year, in general development and also in disaster risk management, we do a lot of cost-benefit analysis. And in this cost-benefit analysis, we have very good methodologies and technique to integrate uncertainty, to integrate risk. We can measure risk. And if we talk to our colleagues from the insurance sector, they have very sophisticated ways to do this. And we have something called probabilistic risk models. But that's going to be my line for the next few years. Probabilistic risk models are like political pollsters. You know, they give you a sense of what may happen, but it's not always what you predicted that happened. And we've seen that a couple of years ago. And so we really need to integrate uncertainty in what we do and play with different scenario. If I take just a concrete example, let's take, I don't know, I mean, all these cities, Manila, Ho Chi Minh City, Colombo, these are all cities where we at the GFDR and the World Bank, we get requests to help the government deal with the fact that these cities get floods and they get more and more floods. And you could go to these cities and think, well, we're just going to pour a lot of concrete, have a drainage system that's going to take the water away. But the reality of it is that if you start looking at the future and at the fact that populations are moving to these cities, this is affecting, even without climate change, this is affecting the way the water flow and the fact that you're going to need more and more water. You can do a lot of scenario analysis in Colombo, and you can deal with the problem today. But a lot of the analysis we now do show that if you deal with the problem today with concrete and building big drainage, you will actually get stuck into a solution that will not give you the flexibility to address the fact that the climate might change. And the climate models are all over the place for Colombo, for example. So you can't predict it. You have uncertainty about it, but you need to integrate that uncertainty in the way you think. And in fact, by playing with a multitude of scenario and the uncertainty around the scenario, for example, in Colombo, the solution that was chosen is really to try to redevelop the natural environment in and around the city, so that as to allow flexible ways for the water to be absorbed and to flow. I'll just end here, Pio, because you're looking at me like I'm taking too much time, in just pointing to the fact that this is really part of the spirit of this new Agenda 2030. I think that we can talk about different framework, the Sendai framework, which kind of guides the disaster risk management world, the SDG or the Paris Agreement, which, by the way, really brings this issue of adaptation to the fore as much as the need to mitigate climate change. The spirit of the Agenda 2030 is really that everything needs to be integrated, and we can't have a better governance system without economic growth. We can't get economic growth without good education system. All of it come together, and clearly we can't have poverty reduction if we don't have an integrated development process. We can't have an integrated development process without proper integration of risk management, and we can't have a proper integration of risk management without taking into account the future climate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis. So you introduced a very important dimension that is not only a national concerns and about how we manage nations in the future, but also the concept in a rapidly urbanizing world. There are this kind of thought how to go along with it. Also, the urban level. They are almost kind of small nations in many cases, that they have their own dynamics. And it is important that when we think about, yes, technological instruments are important, we have to think about also this dynamic. And they are important, of course, to make the dream come true. Therefore, I'm not against technicality. So, Your Excellency, Vice-Ministro de Planeamiento, de Planificación, yes, the Planificación de Bolivia. The floor is yours. What's your country's dream and how you work for it?
Well, thank you very much for this invitation and the opportunity to reflect briefly the understanding of Bolivia about these issues of adaptation and risk management. Well, in Bolivia, first, it is important to say that we have a holistic approach to try to really understand the sustainable development. Well, in Bolivia, we have this approach of the living well in balance with Mother Earth. Well, which in practice has many challenges. So in practice, is our vision to develop systems of life, which means to promote, to produce life at the local level, at the regional level, at the national level. So you understand each of the levels as part of a system of life. And in that context, well, we are very keen in order to protect first the rights of Mother Earth, and also to protect and respect the rights of the peoples, the rights of the peoples to their integrated development. And in that context, well, it's also important for Bolivia, the respect and the recognition, the full recognition of the indigenous peoples and local communities' rights. So we have here a scenario in which we want to really promote this development of system of life by considering this articulation of the different bundles of rights of Mother Earth, of peoples and indigenous peoples. And in that context come, is the issue of the climate change and the disasters, natural disasters. Well, in Bolivia, we have a very a complicated situation because we are moving from floods to droughts. So we have a frequency of extreme events, very much intense events with the years. So this creates a more complicated scenario in order to really promote the development and the management of the systems of life, because we need to really take care and to consider issues related to adaptation to climate change and to the natural disasters. Well, in that context, well, having this holistic approach, also Bolivia has tried to really move a new understanding how we are going to address these issues. And in fact, in the last 5 years, we have approved three very key laws. The first law is the law related to the living well for the integrated living well in the context of the integrated development. So this is really created the linkages between the living well and the climate change and development. So we have a legal framework trying to really put in practice this holistic approach and addressing very specific issues related to mitigation, adaptation to climate change, and also to our vision of joint mitigation and adaptation. In that context, well, there are key priorities for Bolivia is to implement actions in food production in the context of adaptation, water integrated development. And in that context, well, Bolivia has developed some kind of institutional framework also for addressing these issues of mitigation and adaptation. In Bolivia, we have established our plurinational authority of Mother Earth, which is entitled to develop this work related to mitigation and adaptation. To some extent, in this holistic approach, and in this legal framework, risk management is already included in the adaptation because there are many overlapping things between adaptation and risk management. So in this context, well, risk management is already there in the adaptation understanding in the context of this law. Well, in the other hand, we have another important law, which is the law of the risk management itself, which, well, this law is very much related to addressing issues of the short term regarding risk management, but also issues related to the medium term. And when we move into the medium term of risk management, we are very close also to the issues related to adaptation. But, well, this is very much a law trying to promote the establishment of the institutional framework and issues related to the short-term and medium-term disaster risk management approach. But finally, there is one very important law in Bolivia, which, well, we launched recently this year, is the law of the National Integrated System of Planning. And in this law of the National Integrated System of Planning, well, we are really addressing a more comprehensive view of the planning system in Bolivia, trying to really connect the sectoral planning with the territorial planning, the short term, the medium term, and the long term planning. And we have had the opportunity there to really explore new issues and ideas to introduce to the framework of the planning system in Bolivia. And we have had the opportunity to really create the linkages between adaptation and risk management. Now, all the territorial planning in Bolivia, the municipalities, departments, and also at the national level have to take into consideration issues of adaptation connected also to issues of risk management. That's the way how we are addressing in a practical level this issue of the integration. However, we have a lot of challenges related to information, challenges related to the instruments, what instruments we are going to use, instruments more related to adaptation to climate change or more related to disaster risk management. We are in a process. We are very keen to the integration and articulation of adaptation and climate change. We did a very important job at the establishment of the legal framework, and now we are just addressing the issues of the challenges in order to really move forward the implementation of this integrated framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I don't know if you realize the changes. This what we are witnessing here is just amazing. When we are talking about how to practically go in respecting Pachamama, the Mother Earth, while assuring the life of people, that is just few years ago, 10 years ago, was something would have been seen by some, I don't know, some astrological or some intellectual interested in some theoretical issues here and there. Now we are seeing if we want to be serious, it's not just about developing instruments, it's also about developing new legal instruments that are allowing to then work and use innovations in order to fulfill this dream. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now let's go to Vanuatu. Ms. Garaebiti, I heard you a few days ago bringing in your experience. I think that most of us, we are aware about the time clock that is ticking, and maybe you want to tell us something from your experience. Thanks.
Climate change and disaster risk management are concepts that are cross-cutting. So the experience of Vanuatu was, the approach was based on the experience, expertise, knowledge, and action-oriented approach with the situation of Vanuatu islands being on a tropical cyclone belt located on a ring of fire. So Vanuatu is made of 80 islands, but exposed to very high frequency of meteorological hazards and geological hazards. So with these experiences and given the multiple and increasing risk of these hazards, the government had to influence the integration of multiple agencies dealing with geological hazards and meteorological hazards, and also to influence the investment in dealing with such issues. So this also forced the government to also pull together the agencies that are dealing with the impacts of climate change and natural hazards like water, water issues, agriculture and lands into our coordination bodies. So as a result, through the decision made by the Council of Ministers, the government of Vanuatu merged two coordination bodies. One was acting as the National Advisory Committee on Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction, Disaster Management National Action Plan Committee. These two committees were merged to establish what we now call the National Advisory Board on Disaster Risk and Climate Change. So this is an arrangement or a framework that is established to ensure better coordination and to ensure collective decision making on issues related to climate and disaster risk and resilience in such island countries. So the National Advisory Board is then made up of government and non-government. It's there acting as a supreme body in Vanuatu. It's a supreme body to make policy, to act as advisor for all disaster risk reduction and climate change programs. So the role of this body is to ensure strategic governance and policy, technical advisor on project coordination, monitoring, and to ensure that project funds are well managed in terms of governance, financing, procurement, and administration. So this helped to pool resources from different sources, and it helped to minimize duplication of efforts in the activities of reducing risk and adaptation to climate change. So lately, there is a multi-hazard early warning systems have been established covering the major islands in Vanuatu. And you might have heard about the tropical cyclone category 5 storm that has hit Vanuatu in 2015. And a lot of effort have been put in place through this body, National Advisory Board on Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction, to meet the emergency repairs on water systems, on hazard monitoring systems, and lately on the integrated land crop water management to diversify livelihood and increase resilience of the communities in Vanuatu. So the result indicate that although the progress can be slow with the remoteness of islands, but a sustained and continued support from all stakeholders that are involved in this coordination mechanism is necessary to overcome the limited capacity challenges and ensure that climate change does not put more people at risk to increase poverty in Vanuatu. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. So here there is a step further. Advisory bodies that are formed by both government, private sector, civil society that have to go and take decision and let's say assuring that the proper decision will be taken rapidly, and this is a very important instrument that also opens the way then, by the way, for the next few presentations. So first, maybe Eric Nanchen, if you, I would like also to thank you for the co-sponsoring of this side event. I didn't mention you before. Thanks a lot. If you want to tell your points.
Merci. Monsieur le modérateur, je vais commencer avec quelques mots en français par correction pour nos amis hôtes, le Maroc, puisque je suis de langue maternelle française.
Il faudrait y aller en arabe hein, pour nous.
Choukran.
Voilà. Donc je viens...
Assalamu alaikum.
de la partie francophone de la Suisse. Okay, I will follow up in English, and maybe just looking at the title of this side event, I think we could use another word, headache, because it's such a headache to combine disaster risk management and climate change. And I would like, it's more a testimony that I would like to give you here, just to tell you what we do, what we try to do in our region, in Canton Valais, in Switzerland. And there you see, as said Ambassador Perrez, that climate change and disaster risk reduction is for everybody. Okay, let's take one natural fact, rain. Let's say heavy rain, a change in the kind of rain that we have. Why? Because of climate change and the risk, flood. In Canton Valais, we have high mountains and we have lowlands. So if I want to resume the main problem and my main message is that with disaster risk management, we have to deal with high complexity, and that's why I talked about headache. So what did we do, and how do we try to tackle this complexity? And my message is that you really need to have a strategy, and that this strategy has to be done at a local level, at a subnational level, like my Canton Valais, and in relation with what happened at the national level. And this strategy has to be based on a multi-stakeholder approach. The example we'll give you is the following. Imagine heavy rains, a lot of streams coming down to the lowland where we have a big river called the Rhone River, going then to France and to the sea. And we had to find a way to tackle these heavy rains and see how we could reduce the impact and the probability to have droughts. So the idea came to say, okay, we could maybe keep the water in our dams in the mountains. But for that, we had to deal with the private sector because they are the owner of these dams. They manage these dams. So you see, we talked before about the necessity to have legal tools. So here you have the political aspect, because how can you go to the private sector saying, okay, now we want you to release water because we predict heavy rains. Water is money. So you need to work with the private sector to come to an agreement and to have the legal tool that lets you do that. So first you need data. You need to work with the scientists. They have to provide you reliable data, can tell you, okay, tomorrow we expect very heavy rains. And with that, you have predictions. And with that, you can say, we can then give the information to the politics. We can say, now we have to take the decision to release slowly the water. So tomorrow we will have some empty space in the dam, and there we will keep the water coming from the heavy rains and reduce the problem of the drought. So you see, it's very important to have this multi-stakeholder approach, to work with the private sector, to work at every level. And there you see the importance to work with the local authorities and with the population. And for that, you have to raise awareness, of course, and you have to provide the information to the local authorities in order that they can play a role, that they can understand what happens. And you have to deal with this conflict of interest related to the economic world, the private sector, and the problem related to risk and the political role that our authorities have to play when they have to take such decision as asking the private sector to release water in order to have a way to prevent flood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For those who don't know the region, it sounds a little bit technical what you said, but actually, I don't know if many are aware that in 2015, there had been a request from the neighboring France in releasing water during summer because they had difficulties in cooling off their power plants, nuclear power stations. So it becomes not only a matter of discussion between private sector and public sector, matters also, we are talking here about not only risk reduction, but then adaptation, but also rapid decisions that need to be taken that they will not favor all the stakeholders and shareholders. This is important to take into consideration, that this is the reason why the work that they are doing, that includes also modeling, analyzing what kind of investment has to take into consideration a brand new kind of problems that are coming with climate change. But so we are talking about a headache. Are you coming with Ms. Baur from the insurance system? Are you coming with some help, some pills to reduce, or some ways or some instruments to reduce our headache from the private sector?
I hope so. What is the role of insurance? In simple terms, insurance guarantees that funds are available after disaster strikes to intervene rapidly and to build back fast. Insurance doesn't come for free. There's a premium that is paid upfront, but that premium holds important information. Essentially, it means that insurance puts a price tag on risk, which incentivizes disaster risk reduction, prevention, and climate adaptation. Now, this may sound very technical, boring, and Pio has asked me to share my vision. And I'm passionate about this vision. As Francis pointed out in his first slide, clearly risk reduction, prevention, and adaptation are the first priority to avoid that disasters happen. Unfortunately, nobody can afford to prevent every conceivable risk event. And as you all know, whenever a family is hit by a natural disaster, it is a tragedy. It is a human tragedy, but it doesn't have to become a financial tragedy. Unfortunately, today, a natural disaster is often associated with a financial tragedy. But this is where we hope we can help so that this is not the case. And this is my vision. And there's also scientific evidence to that. The Bank for International Settlement a few years ago analyzed hundreds of natural disasters and looked at the economic impact. And it concluded that in countries where there's a widespread penetration of insurance, where insurance covers a lot of the costs, the economic impact, the impact on GDP is less, and countries recover faster after an event. Why is it? Because there is a guarantee that the funds are available quickly after an event, and planning can start immediately again. Unfortunately, in today's world, only about 30% of the economic costs related to natural disasters are insured. So as an industry, we feel we have an obligation to develop new ideas and concepts and work with all stakeholders to make sure that more people and governments can benefit. When you think about insurance, there are different ways to implement insurance solutions. There's no one size fits all or just one approach, but the way we typically know insurance is that an individual homeowner, a farmer, or a company buy an insurance policy to protect their own asset or revenue stream. In some countries, governments make it compulsory that people have insurance against natural disasters. Such is the case in France, Spain, Switzerland. Morocco has just recently passed a law to introduce natural catastrophe insurance, hopefully next year, as part of their overall disaster management strategy. And I think Morocco has also thought through carefully what happens to people who do not have insurance or cannot afford insurance. So they are going to implement a solidarity fund, which I think is a very useful blueprint for many countries in the world. But when households are not insured, what happens? Typically, governments step in, NGOs step in, donors step in, and support people after the event. But that costs money, and most often, they first have to run after the money. Governments have to reallocate budgets, maybe take budgets away from long-planned climate adaptation measures, or investment plans in renewable energy or other development plans in order to deal with the impacts of a catastrophe. They may have to raise taxes, which is not very popular either, increase debt levels, or simply rely on donor assistance after an event. But there are other ways of dealing. Governments themselves can insure, and we have seen pilots around the world. Mexico has been the first government 10 years ago to buy sovereign insurance against hurricane and drought risks and earthquakes as well. Caribbean countries have followed. African countries have formed a pool to do so. Pacific islands have been supported with such an insurance scheme through the World Bank. Vanuatu has received a payout last year. And 2 Chinese provinces have done the same this year. All of these schemes have proven the value of the concept. All have paid out within the last 2 years. But they don't move the needle yet. These are all still more pilots. We need to move to larger scale implementation of such schemes in order to make a difference. The insurance industry has a lot of capacity to absorb such risks, and we are committed and we are ready to act, but we cannot do it alone. We need the collaboration with the public sector, with development agencies, etc. And I think it's very important to recognize that the benefit of insurance goes beyond providing financing after an event. I said at the beginning, insurance puts a price tag on risks and thereby provides incentives for prevention. Why is that? The insurance provides you with valuable information. How much, for example, how much would it cost to insure a certain region against flood risk of a certain amount? This gives you a benchmark because then you can compare how much would it cost to build a higher dam in order to protect against an event which could occur every 100 years instead of every 10 years nowadays. And by how much would insurance decrease? So it provides you a benchmark that allows you to do cost-benefit analysis effectively. And insurance against climate risks provides incentives for prevention the same way as it does for fire insurance. If a company puts sprinklers in its factory, the cost to insure is lower than if there are no sprinklers, or you can't even get insurance without a sprinkler. The same applies to the climate risks. When there is a solid reinforced roof, costs for hurricane insurance is lower than if there's no roof or very poor roof, where you can't even get insurance. So construction type, building codes, and defenses are an important factor when determining the cost of insurance. And this is why insurance and risk prevention reinforce each other. So in order to conclude here, I would like to say that having the financial means to respond to climate risks is a critical component of resilience, in order to be able to respond quickly and rebuild faster. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I pushed a little bit to finish a little bit earlier than in time the presentation to open the floor for you. So, and this is the idea to, I will pick up 2 or 3 first there. I try, please be very, very brief with question or comment, but really short.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for this fantastic panel, this diverse panel. I'm Matthias Honegger, I'm with Perspectives. Our team has actually worked on approaches to quantify adaptation benefits. Saved health, saved wealth are the two primary categories where we can provide support in measuring the benefits of adaptation actions. My question to both the country representatives as well as maybe the insurance sector, how can we work together to find common